It's so difficult still to generate reporting for most companies. They simply haven't got the foundations in place. And that's why I think the dashboard legacy has been quite negative, because it has meant that people have been able to get something, but it's not been scalable. Great, let's do it. But we have to actually spend. Sometimes you've got to spend money to make money.
Yeah.
And that's that difficult conversation. And I've spoken to you lots of times. I think data leadership gets in crisis because I don't think commercially most data people are able to frame those arguments in the right way.
If it's fair to say that the ultimate sell of governance is the AI piece, it's almost...
I think it's refocused there. And I think AI governance has become what data governance should have been from the start, which was better.
And today in the hot seat, I am joined by Adrian Smith, who is a data strategy leader, a transformer of data operations and governance, and currently head of data at Space, and also a part-time LinkedIn influencer as well. Adrian, do you want to give a little bit of a background?
Worked now in data for forever. It's impossible to think of the changes that I've seen over the years, not just from the hairline, but from what technology has brought us. And I was talking about this with someone the other day about I can still remember floppy disks being in the computers. And I mean the actual real floppy disks, not the 3.5-inch varieties, but the actual real ones. Now, how many people would have been in work to not say seeing computers coming? I'm not quite that old, but to seeing computers come, actually everyone have one, and even have your own laptops. That wasn't something which was commonplace. People being able to work remotely, people being able to use the internet, that in itself and the challenges that has brought, it was things that were quite static for a long time. We had server rooms and that's how you did it. But now that's completely, we're shifting away and we're shifting fast.
How do you contain these shifts? Because obviously we're going to talk about governance when things are moving quickly. And I think when you look at AI and you look at everything else that's happening in the last couple of years, in your perspective, is there a similar shift where comparable to something like AI, where it's moving so quickly that things like governance and things like data quality and all of these sort of foundational elements are perhaps struggling to keep up, if that's fair to say, or at least the operational elements around them?
Yeah, short answer, no.
That's the podcast, that's it.
That's it, yeah, thanks very much. No, I don't think there has been. I mean, cloud technology was a shift that changed how we were structuring and behaving, and it was bringing in more SaaS. That was, SaaS, PaaS, if we can call it that. I'm not sure we should call it our information as a structure, not call it AS.
Yeah, no, it's all dying anyway, so that's fine. Do away with it.
Part doesn't work. That was a change, but it wasn't something you had to necessarily do.
Yeah.
And for many organisations, they were quite comfortable if they'd already had the expenditure and already laid out, as the organisations I was working for, when I was working for international financial services organisations, they had even their own dedicated cables running underneath the sea, so to connect them to other data centres. That didn't really fundamentally massively move things. So I don't think it has been. I don't think, even when I think of user-designed applications, and I'm sure we'll talk about shadow IT and how that's shadow AI. That was still something that's been on the cards for a long time. And I didn't really see anything particularly coming in. The only thing I perhaps in the data world that did move quite quickly was dashboards. And that changed, I think, how people perceived a lot of data, and has a really quite horrible legacy about how we build things and rely on certain tools which aren't actually made for that particular function. And only because it can do it doesn't mean you should do it. Now, I probably could have, with enough training and watching enough Bruce Lee films, probably hammer a nail in with my hand. It doesn't mean I should do it, because a hammer would do a better job.
It's a wrong tool for the job.
Exactly. Yeah, thinking of using my hand to hammer a nail in now is probably a stupid one to do. I could have used a screwdriver instead and hit it on the back. But it is what it is. But no, I do. I think that's probably been one of those ones which had a change, but seismic change. No, we didn't have a seismic change. We were still churning out reports. It was just in a different way.
And okay, so something you have mentioned that I think is, and in our conversations previously quite a bit, is never mind AI, which is sort of what we're talking about now. It's like never mind AI. Most customers can't do BI. So the question I have for you is, who exactly are those customers? No. So what should they be doing instead?
It's not just a nice little tagline. It's the truth. I've been talking literally to customers today and talking about customers who haven't got the foundations in place to be able to do it. And there'll be many people say, well, that's rubbish. We can still produce reporting. But it takes them a week to produce that report. Every month they have to spend a huge amount of time. Every quarter, there's still there's finance teams all across the country who are pulling their hair out every single month and every single time you correct those quarters and those half years and those annual times run around, because it's just so difficult still to generate reporting for most companies. They simply haven't got the foundations in place. And that's why I think the dashboard legacy has been quite negative, because it has meant that people have been able to get something, but it's not been scalable. It's not been repeatable. It's not been consistent. It's not been customizable. And they're often designed to put out bonfires and to answer questions then, not to be able to think about it in a more holistic and a bigger way. And that's why so many companies just still can't do actual just basic analytics reporting. They've got analysts and it's not their fault they can't do it. They're trying to query at times huge data sets on tools that are not equipped for the need they have to what they need them for.
What's the blocker there then? What stops?
I think the blocker is that people have actually got something, right? Yeah, they're saying, why make the investment if I've already got something? And it's a real horrible argument, because how do you say to someone, look, if you spend X amount of pounds, you can get your reports quicker. I get my reports when I want them. It's saying, okay, but you can actually free up someone's time to do the value-added activities, which may or may not be true, and they might end up actually having a green banner on instead. But it's trying to frame it as an actual, there isn't a value added to this. We're working with a client now. They work in a regulated industry, and to even have the frameworks in place for them to be legally compliant. But it's when you have organisations who are, okay, we're steady, we're here, we don't need necessarily to do that. And it's then having the right data leaders in place to be able to say, let's leverage the data. That's great, let's do it. And once we leverage the data, what will we be able to do? Well, we can drive revenue doing this. We can start cutting costs doing that. Great, let's do it. But we have to actually spend. Sometimes you've got to spend money to make money.
Yeah.
And that's that difficult conversation. And I've spoken to you lots of times. I think data leadership gets in crisis because I don't think commercially most data people are able to frame those arguments in the right way.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I'm going to very much agree with you, or agree with your statement that you need the right data leaders in place. I would say that because I'm a recruiter, so take that with a pinch of salt. But I mean, from my perspective, you can see it over the last couple of years. I think, especially over the last couple of years, we had that. I tend to lump the last 5 or 6 years together. We sort of had COVID, and then we had the boom periods, and then we had 2023, which I think was a really decisive moment for data, especially. I mean, obviously you had the rise of, the sort of post-ChatGPT era of AI, sort of generative AI rearing its head, and sort of the consequences of that over the last couple of years. But there was a massive decisive shift because of the economic conditions into sort of profitability and cost saving as a core focus. And I think data has made a shift where it's no longer the thing that you invest into because it's it's a little bit of a black box, and you're not leaders aren't sure why it works, or if necessarily they'll get an ROI, and there will be some value that will come out of it. Now there's a harsher microscope on the, is this actually beneficial to the business? okay, well, if we're going to spend money and we have less money, why would we spend it on data over operations or sales or other areas of the business? So you have to justify yourself more, which then comes down to who do you put into place? Is the environment right? These are all the things that I'm trying to tackle with Talos and what I'm building, but that's a conversation for another time. But I suppose, do you think that these problems, I mean, you said data's in a crisis at the moment.
I'd say data leadership.
Data leadership, sorry, yeah. Data leadership's in a crisis. Do you think that's a solvable crisis?
Yeah, I think it's just a way that people are recruited. There's two ways of things. I think one, management in itself, if we get into really big now, is problematic. I think there's a lot of people who come into management purely because they're the best person who was doing that job as an individual contributor, and now they suddenly become manager of people and manager of processes, and those are different skills. So I think so that's not just data. I think that's general management, and I think we see, and I think people are more aware now of toxic work environments, toxic managers, and will now just shift companies. I mean,
especially with younger generations.
I think so. I think massively. Yeah. I think probably, even for myself, I'm still under 50, and I will go if I don't feel comfortable. I think in the past, my father only ever worked for 3 companies in his life, and that was one of those ones when he started when he was 16 and retired when he was 70. I don't think people now will tolerate that, and they take that with them, and I think. But there's still a lack of training, I think, when it comes to actually people management and managing departments. I think that lacks. But I think from a data perspective, it's being about being commercially aware. Now, let's face it, we work in a technological industry. Fine data, technology, it's crossover wherever it's going to be. That upsets a lot of people. But most people come into data because they do something with computers somewhere along the way. And, we're not always going to be, we're probably more often more comfortable playing games at home by ourselves. Not that I'm allowed to anymore. My wife's banned me from playing computer games for about the last, I don't know how many years now. I think it's when she told me she was pregnant the first time and I didn't turn around. But, that
I'm guessing your wife isn't a gamer, or she is? Or
no. She completely disapproves of all computer games, so I'm not allowed anything at all.
Luckily for me, my wife is a gamer, so we sort of share that in common. So
sadly, the last computer system I actually bought was a Mega Drive.
Wow, okay, yeah, that's a while ago.
yeah. I was unable to use the PC for some time, but that's. I wish I'd kept the Mega Drive now. That could have been the pension.
Yeah.
If only I'd known retro games. But because we come from technical things, they tend to have people who aren't necessarily the best communicators.
Yeah.
Or they tend to look at building something that's best in class. And I think that's often the biggest mistake. I so often see job adverts with big long lists of what you want. And sometimes they will focus on a certain area and they'll want really a data engineer. And that's great. It's going to be your head of data. Your head of data is going to be a data engineer, and he's going to build you a platform which is probably going to be way bigger than anything you need, way more complex than anything you need. It's going to be involving technology that you have no real need for. And trust me, I interviewed people recently for a role, and they all tried to, well, not all of them, no, the people who I actually hired, they came to me and said, this is the solution which I think that you need to do. And which was one I already architected. But I didn't want people to just blindly agree with me, but people trying to upsell me things, and I'm saying this is not suitable. And I couldn't get them ever to commercially tell me why they should do that. And I was trying to lead people down the path, and I just couldn't get that commercial argument to why you would do that. And I see that repeatedly. I've spoken with people before, they wanted a head of data and they wanted someone, said they were really looking for BI role. In that case, you're going to hire someone who's really good at BI. You're going to end up down that same horrible path that so many companies have been in, where they use something like Power Platform to do all the transformations rather than do it properly in the back end. You need someone who looks at things holistically. And I think that's what lacks. It's that holistic view of everything that comes in from data. And yes, it might be a generalist, and I'm still pretty technical, and I try to keep my hand into fingers into as many pies as I possibly can do. But there's only so much that you can absorb or be an expert in.
Yeah.
You can't be an IC across everything.
Well, I think companies don't help with this either, with hiring requirements, again, especially from what I've seen, because where there is, especially in the current market, so we're recording this in 2026, but there is a sort of melding of roles, and maybe it comes from a lack of understanding of how these things should function in terms of doing the proper rigor that should be required when looking at leadership positions, which I would argue that you need to really do because again with data and even AI and technology, it's individual to each company. There isn't a one size fits all. It's how it's as individual as literally your data is within your organization. Yeah. So you can't copy anything. Copying a job spec online is probably the worst thing you could do for that type of leadership. Maybe copy the CFO job spec online, but don't copy the CDO or the data leader. Yeah. So companies are playing a part in this as well.
I think so massively. Yeah. I think whoever advises them it's just often wrong. Yeah, you need to have a strong partner into place to be able to say what you want to do. Having both sides, and I see this so often as well. You want someone who's going to lead the strategic direction of the department and the embedment of data throughout the organisation, and creation of data assets and data products and whatever else. At the same point in time, I want you to be coding in Python and whatever else it's going to be. And no, depending on the size of the organisation, yes, sometimes you have got to go proverbially roll your sleeves up and get stuck in. I've been into startup environments, so I've had to do things because I haven't got the budgets to get other people to do it. But you then also need capacity to be able to, as that organisation grows, as long as it doesn't roll over and die, as that organisation grows, you need to be able to say, okay, and now I can start pushing away. My time isn't best spent actually putting together a piece of code. My time is actually better spent working with other senior stakeholders and really understanding actually what do you really need.
Being at the business table.
Yeah, what's going to make the difference now? Because data without operations is just processes. So it's that alignment of the data and the operations together which really drives the magic. And you can only do that if you actually really embed yourselves together to create that extra synergy.
It's almost like sort of a role reversal. You come up technically, and then you come up technically, and then it sort of drastically flips into an incredibly people-facing role.
Yeah, it's never. I don't think it's ever really sort of a gradual process. I think you do. I think you go from that. If you're fortunate enough, you might end up as the lead of that particular, of a senior and the lead, and therefore you start taking people. But then the problem with that is it then takes people often away from what they're best of doing, which is actually contributing to something they're probably not so good at doing, which is starting to lead. And that's another problem with a lot of organisations struggle with. And it's actually, to me, it's okay to not put those people or promote them. I think that's something else which has become just wrong, the constant promotion, constant changing of job titles. You can just actually pay people more and just make them more senior. You don't need to keep changing the job titles, senior and extra senior and I don't know, Lord Humongous of Data World or whatever it's going to be. But you can have it. It just becomes an organic process because you're respected. And I've been into organisations which are properly flat. And you've never had more than 2 steps away from the CEO, or it's supposed to have been, and it certainly was like that. But people knew who those senior people were.
Yeah.
It wasn't a case of, because they've got an office or they've got a really long job title now, which involves executive or president or something or other. It's because they're just known to be within the organisation. They're the real experts. And they can still retain that element of their core skills as well as then potentially coming out and managing people or managing processes, managing operations, departments or whatever else it's going to be.
And I suppose taking a slightly different direction, how does that flip on to things like, actually understanding your customer base, or actually creating things that do move the needle. Like what do you, what are the things that you would actually build to move that needle? What's the discovery process for that? So you mentioned there, it's like, you actually need to know the people. But then I suppose in your experience, what's the output? What's the positive output from that?
To me, it's always about knowing. This is like an interview, right? This isn't a conversation. This is the interview.
You'll be writing notes.
Yeah.
What's
the ideal answer to that? And I think from what you said earlier, it can always depend on the company. But you need to know your company, and you need to know who's in your company, and you need to know what their strengths are, and you need to know what the company's strengths are. And you need to understand it in the context of the operating model. And I think that sometimes that's the bit that gets forgotten about. If I wanted to try to sort of pinpoint something which is really obvious, which so many companies don't do, which involves actual data and processing data, and particularly when it's combined with AI, it's a bit anticlimactic now. It's to do with customer calls. How many companies actually process data from customer conversations? I would say very few. How easy is it now to extract an accurate transcript? Because we've way moved on that one. That one has really moved on so fast in the last couple of years. From something where
it's all the AI note takers flying around.
Wow. I mean, we've gone from the AI note takers, which would capture everything, and it would start off with Adrian was talking about the weather, and then John came in and started talking about how he'd been to the cinema with the kids at the weekend. Now they ignore that. Now they actually get down to the nitty-gritty and really capture not just accurately what everyone's saying, it still captures the rubbish that I talk about, but it captures it and summarizes it in a super duper way. And I experienced this recently. It wasn't a dispute with another company. I'd been a customer with them for 20 years. They were providing my TV and broadband. And I needed to get a copy of my transcripts I had with them, because they thought I owed them some money, and they told me no, it was all by accident. They never told me it was by an accident. I told them, and then they said, oh yeah, it was, sorry. And actually, they never even said sorry.
Oh no, that's like
thank you. But then when I read the transcripts, they actually had on there a summary. So I created an information request, a subject access request on this basis, and it did contain a summary. And it said Adrian was unhappy, we talked about this and blah, 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 blah. They never, ever actioned it. So they're doing it, but they're not taking action from it. And there's so much value you can take from it. I'm not saying, if they'd done something, they could have kept me as a customer. This is not for me. But as a whole, how many companies are missing out on this real potential gold mine that they can utilize? They can fine-tune their products. They can find out what the problems are that people keep phoning up and stating that they've got. They can,
behavioural trends over how many
massively. Look, if you've got a call centre and you're employing people to take calls day in, day out, there must be a reason why, particularly when you're trying to push everyone to be an online platform anyway. So what's the problems? What is the problems that people are continually facing? Because surely you must be able to understand that and then correct the course of action that you need to be able to do. And it staggers me.
Or you could even tie it into sort of things like new product launches or systematic changes. If you change it and then there's suddenly a spike in complaints, or even just specific things about I don't like what you've done here. Then you'd be like, okay, we need to roll that back, or at least change it geographically. It might work some areas, it might not, or it
completely
might.
Exactly. Something exactly completely. I can say that again, Shane. Exactly, completely. Like I'm stuck record now. It's what happens. Geographically, something might work there, but it might not work in another. And you start realising that actually they don't want that, but these people do. So you have to be able to respond. Personalisation is the biggest challenge to many organisations. Now, there's huge amounts of stats around where, particularly now younger people, and they will become, as they get older, they will tame this habit. They want a personalised service. People don't want anymore just to be dumped into the same bucket. You can sell them the same product. No, you might buy the same product. I might buy the same product. My mum buys the same product. But what we have are different triggers to us. And that's what companies are not. They're not recognizing that still. They're not utilizing, because they haven't got the inbuilt data platforms to be able to do this segmentation of customers. And you said, understanding who your customers actually are. Because they're not understanding who their customers are, they can't leverage this.
Well, I suppose on the flip side, so I recently went to a conference in London, Game Changer, shout out to Game Changer London. But they had some really interesting insights on personalisation. And I think the core problem they identified through the research that they did is that people nowadays, both younger generations specifically, younger generations really specifically, older generations are over time being like this as well, where they're trusting the trust barrier to personalisation. So it's like good personalisation is like you said, it's the sort of gold mine, but there's a really thin line into it. So, for example, if you, I think it was the example that they used where they had a dog and they'd subscribed to all these dog services, food, or et cetera, et cetera. The dog dies. One company cancelled everything immediately, sent her like sorry for your loss. The other companies just carried on sending her stuff because obviously there's no personalisation of data. It's because they didn't realise the change in the pattern.
Yes, exactly.
What company? And she said, what company am I going to go with? I'm going to go with, if I get another dog, I'm just going to exclusively use their services because they provided a personalised service based on my experience. And then I think there are other examples, but again, that barrier to trust. The younger generations specifically are really sensitive to incorrect personalization. Amazon's a good example. If you search something on there, you're going to get bombarded with everything else. It's like, if you've already bought everything, why you don't want to. Yeah, we had the same thing with baby stuff. We obviously searching lots of baby stuff, and then we get bombarded with baby stuff. And now she's a year and a half. I'm still getting ads for cots and cribs, and it's like I bought one. I don't need another one.
But if you do it well, it's an absolute gold mine. I've always used Netflix as my example on this. There have been dozens of streaming platforms, probably even more.
Shame the UI is a bit nowadays.
If we go back, back in time to Napster, we can go really far back. There's been so many different ones. I think Napster got shut down, so that's not a great example. But streaming sites have been really commonplace. Netflix is by far the most dominant, and the reason it's been the most dominant is not because of the content that it holds. Pretty much had the same content as all those other streaming platforms. It was that ability to show you what it thought that you wanted to see and it being right. And that when it can do that, that's the real gold mine.
Interestingly, I feel like it's gotten worse recently, or as they've gotten bigger and the data is wider and they've got more to process. And this might just be my own personal experience. It's very anecdotal. But
it might be, Eric, that you just watch too much on Netflix and therefore you have exhausted all possibilities. There's only so much you can watch.
Yeah, I think that might be it as well. There's a lot of sort of late night bottle feeding with young daughters, sort of just brain dead. I don't even know that I've watched it half the time. But I suppose moving on to so obviously personalisation is a big thing, like we said, but there's that trust element. So how does governance play into this? Because obviously, governance is. This year has been described as the year of governance. We had sort of experimentation agents. Agents are still very much a thing, AI agents, but all of this, has led rise to a lot of conversation about data governance because of the AI elements, because of just where data naturally is anyway. So I suppose what's your take on governance in general and the theoretical nature of it?
There's loads we could talk about on here. We can even tie it back to the personalisation piece.
Yeah, that's a good place to start.
I think people are very conscious about the amount of data they do share. I do think we all probably press accept all when it comes to cookies most of the time.
Yeah, or where I think organisations deliberately make you jump through too many hoops.
And there's some where you just sort of you just click on choose and then you're like, that's just too many. I can't be doing clicking all that. Sometimes just delete it. I'm not interested in actually doing it. But I think people are interested in still. And that is governance, how much data are you collecting? And certainly for the organisations who I engage with, and as either advising them or working with them, is that we still try to keep that GDPR principle of data minimisation. Because there isn't any point in collecting data and storing data and even running it over AI, because I'll come to that in a minute, because you're causing yourself problems. It's hard enough to manage the core data that you have without creating monster-sized data sets of unimaginable size. I worked for one organisation which was capturing data from comparison engines. Now, if you click to third party, then it shares the data with you. There was about 30 of these engines which are being run from different companies, all sending you different data sets. So they've all got different size data sets, all different configured in different ways, different formats, which in itself brings a problem. And then there's a whole massive issues around data quality in those data sets of, if you ask people a particular question, they're less likely to answer the very first thing that comes around. I worked for a bank, and Bank of England collects data around what segments these companies are. The very first option is central bank. So there are a huge number of central banks, because people were just selecting the first one. And the people who did this had to go away and correct it. But that's the problem you get with trying to collate huge amounts of data. You've got to be able to manage it. And I think that's really hard in normally to be able to do. But it exasperates in an AI world, because you've now got huge amounts of data. Some of that may be incorrect in a data store that's not necessarily configured in the way that it should be. It lacks the semantic layers, and therefore it doesn't give you the answers that you want it to be giving you. It is giving you, it's connecting the dots. It is making you that picture, but that dot to dot isn't a unicorn. It's something that's probably been run over a few times. You can kind of make out that there is something, probably a unicorn there, but it's been hit by a bus. And that's problematic. And that's where governance comes into play, I think, here. And it is way wider than that.
Yeah, I think it's people have been sort of describing, so again, with, like we were mentioning earlier, with AI, it's almost playing catch up a little bit. I mean, obviously there's the EU AI Act coming into place. It seems like there is more regulation coming, maybe not in America, more in Europe. I suppose are companies ready for that level of scrutiny, especially in sort of regulated environments?
Do you know, I don't think we've still caught up with GDPR.
Yeah.
I think most companies, if you made an actual subject to access request and said, show me everything you've got on me, and you didn't ask for a particular thing over a particular time frame, I think they would really struggle. I think that's, I do know, I know that for many companies, it's a manual process of going through and trying to find the stuff. And if you haven't got it labelled properly and it's not consistently labelled, then it's a nightmare. It's something which is really time consuming. So I don't think most companies are ready for a structured AI regulatory regime. I think we're so far behind capabilities of doing it. But I'm also doubtful the number of companies who do have AI processes. And by this, I mean outside of machine learning, because I think we're pretty confident what machine learning does. So I'm talking things around even natural language processing. I think we can probably assume that's working in the way that it should be doing, because we've had that for a long time as well. I'm talking about, people talk about AI, they talk about LLMs.
Yes, yeah, they tend to conflate the two. Yeah,
I think that's pretty much, I think people should consider those two now just the same term. I think there's very few companies which use LLMs in an enterprise scale way, in an approved enterprise scale way, that actually do make a difference. And I think that's where governance can make the difference, because I think we've got a lot of shadow AI tools into place. And as a governance person, you don't want to stop progress. You don't want to stop people doing things, but you've got to do it properly.
So I suppose it's almost, if it's fair to say, that the ultimate sell of governance is the AI piece. It's almost...
I think it's refocused there. And I think AI governance has become what data governance should have been from the start, which was about being an enabler and about creating actual data assets, rather than having what most data is, which is just just a bit of a mess and a liability for most organisations. And I think it has. I think it's really reframed it and pushed it, not just to push it to the forefront, but really changed people and said, yeah, actually, you do need to do this. I'm sure many people say, I've been wanting to tell you this for years. But I think it has. I think people are scared when it comes to AI about what it can do. I was asked to come along to a presentation. It was put on by a very big consultancy, one of the biggest banks in Europe, and a technology partner, one of the biggest companies in the world. And what they were producing was, it was an LLM, and it was a customer-facing interface, but it only worked on publicly available information.
Oh, okay.
So you would basically go into, so you could say, what loans do I have available? And it would say, we can lend you this money at this interest rate. You couldn't ask it what my loan balance was.
Mm.
That was an incredibly big investment. And we're talking, this is 8-figure sums to get to that point. And it took a enterprise-wide initiative to get that moving as well. And it wasn't being done by the technology person, it was being done by a product person. They were the owner for it. They're responsible for the output. They're responsible for how it's performing. And that's changed that as well. So we actually now have actual ownership. No one's ever wanted to be a data owner. No one ever wanted it. But now it's kind of changed it from, actually, I do have to take ownership of this because it's changing the way and the dynamics that I'm working.
Mm.
And
it's almost like sort of data realized, because I suppose the data like AI, like we said, is why it's quite difficult being a CDO and why there's sort of a difficulty of tenure that's sort of documented. But, it is sort of aggregated throughout the entire organization, which means that, it's not just I am the leader of the procurement operation and I do my thing in the procurement. Data is everywhere. Everyone should be using data, and AI is a similar thing. It's everyone is. You want every. People talk about data and AI literacy because you want everyone to be using it, and especially with data, you want ideally everyone to be producing quality data that is governance compliant and
exactly,
that can be used. Yeah, but I suppose but then that's also interesting in your point where that also means you can create sort of data and AI advocates out of other departments.
Always have been. Yeah, you're always going to get your super users. Those are your champions. Those are the ones who are going to be your eyes and ears on the ground about what people want to be able to do, and what people can do. But also the ones who you've also got to keep your eyes on, because they're the ones who are going to create sometimes the problems for you. But if you do it in enough of a way that you actually create an environment where people can submit ideas to you, and it can be done in a kind of democratic way, as open as it can be, that's how to manage it to me. Otherwise you're going to end up in the position of people doing things in secret.
I was going to say, because again, I suppose when you're looking at the AI side, I think a concern that has been flagged to me a lot, and you see it in conversations, is you can't stop people from using AI. I think education has the same problem. You can't stop students from using AI when it comes to at all levels, from GCSE all the way up to university level, but obviously in the enterprise level, or even any organisation, if most of your people are using AI in some form and it's not approved, if you're too tight on the constraints, like we can only use our internal system and it's very basics, we need to build out first, especially if the company is quite lacks maturity in data or lacks maturity in AI. But obviously you've got access to all these incredibly powerful models through the massive technology vendors, Anthropic and Google, and so how do you approach that when it's if someone starts coding with Claude Code and creates something and then tries to connect it to the company's sensitive database?
Yeah, that's why you've got to have those approval routes. If you don't have those approval routes into place and they're actually open enough, you've got to be responding to people. If it works, then put it through the processes.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there a need for it? Yes, there was a need for it. Okay. Does it actually do what we expect it to do? Yeah. Is there a way of monitoring it? That's the key to it. Can we actually monitor what it's doing? Because otherwise, can we pull the plug on it?
Yeah, kill switch sort of.
Completely. Otherwise, you end up in this situation of things that could go off and do who knows what it's going to do. And we've not really had a case yet. Okay, we had Claude Bot, or whatever it's now called, exposing lots of people's API keys and passwords.
Yeah.
But that wasn't enterprise-wide. That wasn't an enterprise problem. I'm waiting still for that really first big AI. Difficult to say about swearing, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm waiting to see that. I'm waiting to see that one, because I think that will be when people really sort of take note. Because to me, it's not so much for security. I'm okay, yeah, you could expose various things. People don't think about the cost of it.
Yeah.
AI isn't free. Okay, you've got a subscription. I've got a subscription. We pay Anthropic, whatever it is, per month to be able to utilize it. But we hit our limits.
Yeah.
Now, it's quite easy to set something up, particularly if you did it company-wide. Then that would, every time you use tokens, it costs. Tokens cost money. APIs calls cost money. And you set up an autonomous agent which could potentially make its own APIs and start making those calls. Where's it going to stop? And you realise it's done something which is totally over the top.
Or get stuck in a loop.
I've done it before, not with AI, but in an older system. And this is why I talk about it right from the beginning, that when I coming back from where you're always working on-prem services, if you put something into a loop, just like what you said, you used to get a phone call.
Yeah.
Now what could happen, if you haven't got the right safeguards into place, you'll just scale up. And you're now paying for that. And it's not until someone looks at it and says, whoa, our utilization is going crazy. Well, let's kill it off. And I think that's the same what could happen with some of the AI tools. And I really worry about that one, because when we had shadow IT and we had people making their own applications, that was contained. That was in a box. Didn't go anywhere else. That was it. These can create costs for the organisation, and it can put its tentacles elsewhere as well. So, I don't want to be conspiracy theory about that, or talk about how it can start with hallucinations, or it could do something. I mean, most agents, they do have limits to what they'll do, and you can put those guardrails in place. But the cost side of things, that's the part I think people are thinking about still.
They won't think about it until it really hits them.
It won't, yeah. I mean, you're dealing with, it's one thing from you having a conversation to you running a data set of 20 million records through it.
Yeah. And
you doing that several times a minute.
People say this is almost like the golden era of AI, because it's that they need to keep costs low currently. It's operating as a loss model, most AI companies.
Well, they are.
Yeah, they are.
Huge loss. Huge loss.
Because they need people to use it for now. Yeah. When that eventually changes, that's probably when we'll see those really big, because at the moment it's like, token usage, I know we've spent a couple of grand, which to an organisation maybe not, or maybe even 10, 20, and it's like rap on the knuckles. But we could in the future get cases where it's like, this agent has, or swarms of agents, has spent millions doing something.
Yeah. Well, we see it simply. Look at Microsoft, and Microsoft became sorry for any Apple users, but it became the dominant player, and it is the dominant player. If I want to write a document, I use Word. The only way I can get Word is buying it as a person. I have to subscribe now online.
Yeah.
I have to pay my, whatever it is, £90 a month to get a product I used to be able to buy as a one-off. Now I have to subscribe to it because it's so ingrained into how we do things. I understand there are free alternatives, and I probably could use AI to actually build me an alternative now. But it's so ingrained that people do buy this.
Well, that and it's if you built something yourself, no other system would recognise it.
Yeah. I could probably get it to write to the same file format. I don't know, but it's not quite the same. Yes, you get, and I think that's going to happen. I think that's kind of the inevitability that the way we're going to move. Yes, you get people addicted and you rise up the price. First hit is for free.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and first hit and your data, and then we'll start charging you the year for it. I suppose then the natural question is when these things happen, because it's almost like I think everyone's sort of, like you said, waiting with bated breath for for when's the first really big mistake going to happen. Who's accountable? Who if it's an agent, who does that sit with?
Yeah.
Presumably it's, it would rest on the shoulders of the person leading the AI function. But even that's up in the air these days.
I don't think it is the person who runs the AI function. I think ownership, just like data governance, belongs within the business.
Yeah.
The only reason you have an AI agent or whatever you're running is to perform an action. That action is on behalf of the business, is to perform an operation. Therefore, it naturally falls within their remit.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense for it to be outside. And I think that level of personal responsibility could create those limits, just like you've got the senior management regime with the FCA of the senior managers of a financial organisation are personally responsible if that organisation goes belly up. And I think you have to have that same level of responsibility with AI. Now, I know as a layperson, they can't control it, but they can have the risk processes in place. They can demand to say, I want you to be able to do this, and I want someone who knows what they're doing to be able to show me how it does this. And as a data governance or as an AI governance person, they're there to put the policies in place. They're to put the frameworks into place to satisfy those owners that everything is going on. And they have that level of responsibility to be able to do that. And so because if you said to someone, look, you're the owner of this now. What, really? I don't know if it works or not. But if you empower someone and show to them and say, okay, here it is. Here's the actual proof that this is doing this, and we run this on this basis, and et cetera, and we have these controls into place, we've got these guardrails into place, we have these limits into place. Then if I was that business owner, I'd be happy to say, yeah, this is good, this is doing what I want it to do. Otherwise, it's like having a factory that you know full well is stuffing asbestos in baby toys. No, someone needs to take responsibility for that. It's not the person who is on the actual on the conveyor belt doing it, and it has to therefore belong to somebody further higher up to say, this is what you're actually doing. You take responsibility for that. You were the one who wanted to sell teddy bears. You needed to know what was going into those teddy bears, just like you would need to know what's going into your AI models.
I suppose then that then becomes a question of I suppose, again, coming back to sort of literacy and AI literacy, because obviously if using your analogy, if I'm
this is a tough one.
Yeah,
it's
so
one of my weird ones I come up with. It's just flame-proof teddy bears.
If I'm a board that sells teddy bears, or our knowledge is based in teddy bear sales and manufacturing and all these sorts of things, and then you put you need to innovate. You put a new interactive screen in the teddy bears, like the Teletubbies, but it's AI. And so now you need to start thinking about AI governance and all these other things, because you're going to start, it's going to start speaking to kids, all this sort of stuff. The analogy is getting away from me a little bit, but you get the idea of people who aren't technologically minded now suddenly have to become technology minded and understand the depths of why it's important to do these things, and I think that's where the accountability stumbles, because I can't have accountability because I don't understand it.
I think so as well. But if we have some regulatory regimes, I don't mean to be really boring, but it's the customer duty. Okay, so customer duty now says that financial services companies have to do the best by their customers. Okay, you can't be openly ripping you off anymore. That whether that actually really happens or not, or what the definition of that is, but you try to do the best. So if you have underperforming products, in other words, you see a lot of people going into debt because of that product, it's not doing what it should be doing. And at a board level, and this is where, would AI ownership really go to the board level? Probably not. It would probably come down one below. Ideally, it would live up there, so you had your highest possible sponsors.
But you want to be direct reporting into the CEO.
I think so, somewhere along those lines. But for what I was saying with this, for consumer duties, you have to report and you have to be able to say it's being reviewed. So you have to have those metrics into place. If you can have those metrics into place and someone signing off to say these metrics are fine, these processes are doing what they've got to do, why can't we have it for AI? It takes it away from being something abstract I don't know anything about, to saying, I've got the people into place, I've put the controls into place, I'm maintaining it as we expected it to do, and here they are. Here's the proof. It's the same as if I go into the toilet and someone signed that sheet to say what the hour rate was. If it's covered with horrible stuff all over the floor, I know someone's not done it.
So it's almost like due diligence of...
It is. You're checking. It's that check to see. Someone's actually saying, I've been in here. I've been in here and I've cleaned it up and I've done it. I've done the job.
I suppose, does that mean, again, take your toilet example, there's probably a standardization for how you clean a toilet, how I think in cleaning services, which are very important. I think COVID proved that, because they were key workers. There's a standardization of what counts as hygienic. There's a standardization of hygiene. When, like the point we mentioned earlier, where we have data and AI that is so individual to every company, and then you want to put a due diligence in place, where it's something that companies can follow, who aren't the most technically minded, but they want to be able to do due diligence so they don't fall into, especially as the growing governance traps and things like that of nature. So how do you approach that issue of where data is so individual, but you want to apply a standardized due diligence process?
I don't think it has to be necessarily a standardized process, but you need to have certain elements. Yeah, so we always want to have human in the loop.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a standard check that you want to be able to have into place. But then you also want to say, measure it against your performance. What are you expecting the results to actually be?
Yeah.
That demonstration I went to, they had a brilliant idea to me, which was a breakathon. So they purposely went in to try to actually break it. And it's only when they were comfortable that they couldn't keep breaking it. It wasn't going to give any responses which compelled people to go away or to try to go and invest on the moon or something. They were willing to launch it. And then, even only then, they were still manually monitor the outputs. So you can have I don't think you can have a standard framework. I don't think anyone would say you would have a standard framework. There are certain points you want to be able to meet in an AI framework. I wouldn't say you could have one size fits all, because it's going to massively depend on what you're asking it to do.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference between the accuracy of trying to guess what the weather is today for a person is trying to guess what the weather is for a fisherman. There's going to be a huge difference in telling me what this looks like compared to, for me when I'm walking around, to someone who's going to be foraging for mushrooms, or someone who's using it in a hospital and they're trying to use it as a diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
Where one can be at a level of 75% accuracy, one you need almost 98% accuracy. Well, one thing we need to be careful with any things when we talk about, I was talking about accuracy, so I'm going off my own little sidebar. AI is often put that it needs to be accurate, but it's never benchmarked against a human. So therefore, why should AI necessarily be more accurate than a person?
I think this is something you come up against in like autonomous vehicles. It's autonomous vehicles are safer than human drivers, but we put a larger emphasis on them being almost like 100%.
Every time, exactly. Yeah. Every time we see a crash of an autonomous vehicle, it makes the news.
Yeah.
Imagine if we had that every time there was a crash on the road, then there'd be nothing else on the news, which may or may not.
Yeah, maybe there should be a ritualistic shaming of people who crash.
I mean, it might not be a bad thing if we just, it was just well, I guess you could say the world's a car crash at the moment, but that would be far too negative to look at it like that.
Yeah, feel bad.
Look. I mean, AI is something that we need to have governance around, but it can't ever be standard.
Yeah,
because it does different things, and we called AI earlier, and we said no, we transplant it with LLMs, but it's about what it's trying to do.
Definitely.
And you can still have that same framework around making sure, is there a business case for it? Have we been able to check it? Can we monitor it? We can have those basic elements to it, but fundamentally it's always going to be what's what is the purpose for it? What's it actually trying to achieve? And then we can actually start looking at it from a governance perspective. What are the risks? The risk might be really low. So, I'm not going to be spending weeks building up a framework and sending it off to someone in a board. If the risk was really high, the AI Act would say, no, you can't do it anyway now. But it could be, there are exemptions to it. The AI Act still allows us to do things. But then that's when we need to build a bigger framework around it, and more checks and balances, and make sure, even ethically, if it's right.
I think that's a very good point to end on, that sort of ethically, because I think that's the underpinning of all of this is all meant to be ethically. A lot of governance rules are based in ethics. It's do things correctly, don't take advantage of people, make sure data safety. I suppose rounding off then. Last, quick fire, one or two word question or one or two word sentence. What do you think the future will be for this sort of governance journey that we're on? The next sort of 5 or 10 years, where do you think we'll end up?
I think it'll be painful.
Yeah.
Although I do think it'll be painful. I think there'll be lots of potential for growth. I think there'll be lots of mistakes made along the way, but we learn from our mistakes.
Perfect. Yeah, I think learn from mistakes is the biggest one. Fail, but learn from the failures.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you for coming on, Adrian. And where's the best place for LinkedIn for people to follow you if they want to?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn far too often.
Yeah. I'll probably make on LinkedIn lunatics one day. So, I think it's like a badge of honour once you sort of make onto that subreddit. But yeah, thank you for everyone for watching. You can subscribe, follow along to catch more conversations. If you have any questions based on what we've talked about or just want to continue the discussion, put those in the comments below and we'll do follow-ups if we get enough questions, or we can answer them directly, and we can always have Adrian back to answer maybe more in depth for a whole episode in the future. But that's all for now. See you in the next one.
Dallas.